Welcome to week 2, chapter 2, where we are going to be discussing health determinants, measurement, and trends. So I always try to start off with a little bit of terminology that we may come across in our reading. First one is obviously health determinants, and for some reason, every time I see that, I always want to say health detriments. Sadly enough, I think that detriments could actually be substituted in many ways. Health determinants include age, genetics, environment, gender, socioeconomic status, and as we discussed in week 1, education is a key factor in socioeconomic status. And I think education, as pointed out by many in class, education is something that can affect health outcomes, whether it's on an individual basis, on a national basis, or on a global basis. Second term is disability adjusted life year, and I hope you'll humor me on this one. I really don't know how it is supposed to be pronounced. I've always called it a DALY because my dog's name is Dallas and we call him Dally for short. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to refer to DALYs as the disability adjusted life years. And in most simple terms, it's really used as a health indicator, and it's the years of healthy life lost, whether that is due to an infectious disease or a chronic disease. And then HALE, health adjusted life expectancy. Sorry, I don't have any fun abbreviations for that. If I were in Hawaii, it would be pronounced HALE. This is the number of years a person of any given age can expect to live in good health. So good health being completely different than life expectancy. And you'll see HALE used quite a bit in this chapter. Then we'll be talking about transitions, and included in transitions are demographic transitions, epidemiologic transitions, and though our text didn't really cover it, I would like to briefly discuss nutrition as a transition. It was in our other textbook, and I think it bears repeating that it does play a part in health determinants. And then, of course, a risk factor is an aspect that is known to be associated with health-related conditions. You can think about it if you have risk factors for any chronic diseases. For instance, and I'm really grasping here, perhaps you have high blood pressure. Well, that could be a risk factor for cardiovascular disease or stroke. So there you go. I think risk factor is probably self-explanatory. So diving into the transitions. Sorry, I wanted to go ahead and start with nutrition transitions, even though it's not in the text. Just briefly, it describes a population shift from a stage in which undernutrition and nutrient deficiencies are prevalent to an intermediate stage in which undernutrition and obesity are both problems in the population, to a stage, which I think we can relate to in the United States, in which overweight and obesity are the dominant nutritional disorders. So I'd like you to know nutritional transitions. I'm sorry that it's not in the text, but hopefully that just gives you a little bit of insight into it. Moving on to demographic transition. So first we have the demographic divide, in which the highest income countries have low fertility, often declining populations because they have low fertility, and aging populations. And then lowest income countries will have relatively high fertility and growing populations. As we look into the demographic transition, we can see a shift from the pattern of a high fertility and high mortality to low fertility and low mortality. I know that sounds a little jumbled up, so to simplify it, I think we can just break it down into why it happens. So obviously, mortality does decline with better hygiene and nutrition. As we discussed in week 1, better hygiene, including clean drinking water, access to sanitation, definitely does impact mortality rates. And then we will see the population gap grow between births and deaths. Fertility does decline, and then the population growth slows. we see an equalization of the births and deaths with such a demographic transition. Then going into the epidemiologic transition, this is where we're seeing a shift in the burden of disease dominated by communicable, so for lack of better terminology right now, we'll use infectious disease, to a burden of disease dominated by non-communicable disease. So one of the key things to know about diseases, and I am usually pretty good about letting you know when something is going to be on an exam. So we do have a final exam in this class. One of the questions you will need to know is what kind of disease is cancer? Cancer is non-communicable. You're not going to catch cancer from standing too close to someone or from someone coughing on you. So knowing that difference between a communicable disease where it can be spread, it can be caught from contact, versus one that cannot be spread, non-communicable. Key fact in this class, and it will be on a test. So there you go. Now you have an answer to at least one question. We're seeing low-income countries going through epidemiological transitions right now. And first and historically, high and fluctuating mortality related to very poor health conditions, epidemics, and famine. So that's where we're going to see these low-income countries that may not have access to clean drinking water, access to sanitation. They're struggling to feed the population because they cannot grow the crops necessary to sustain that type of population. So then we see declines in mortality as epidemics become less frequent. So there's so many factors that come into play as to why an epidemic of an infectious disease would become less frequent. We'll briefly cover those in the next couple of slides. But overall, a lot of it is, again, going back to education, political policies, and the country's support on whether they're going to actually quote unquote buy into these prevention measures. Finally, further declines in mortality, increases in life expectancy, and the predominance of non-communicable diseases. So I think we can kind of see that in the United States. We've seen a noticeable decline in mortality as our health technologies and even as our prevention model of healthcare is becoming more prominent. We've seen increases in life expectancy, and we've seen the predominance of non-communicable diseases. So if you look at the United States as an example, we don't see a lot of things like malaria or, for the most part, influenza. Every once in a while there's a nasty strain that sneaks in that we have a little bit of a battle. But if you think about it in a global sense, we have definitely already gone through this epidemiological transition, and we're seeing more of a non-communicable disease model. So we've got more patients with cancer, obesity, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, you name it, anything that does not fall into communicable diseases. Finally, in closing, I went ahead and included the table on life expectancy and the percentage gain in life expectancy that was posted for numbers 1960 through 2013. I find it really interesting. I'm not normally a numbers person, but when you look at some of these changes, for instance, East Asia and Pacific had a life expectancy of 46 in 1960, and now they're up to 75. I don't know about you guys, but I am well over 46, and reading some of these is just astounding to me to see the increases in life expectancy. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience as I kind of muddled my way through the recording this week. Hopefully you were able to get some additional information, and Hope you have a great week. Workload is pretty light this week, so urge you to look at your checklist, see what's due, and let me know if any questions. Again, best way to reach me is Tina Freeman at cwidaho.cc. Thanks, everyone.